our research is becoming more and more relevant as we understand that heat stress also affects cattle of all ages. Like you said, growing heifers, young stock, dry cows.
Good day, and welcome to the Dairy Podcast Show. I'm Mark Thomas from Dairy Health Management Services and one of the hosts of the Dairy Podcast Show. It's a pleasure today to have Dr. Jimena Laporta with us from the Department of Dairy Science. She's a professor at Wisconsin-Madison. Jimena, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a good day to be here.
So, Jimena, we had some time to catch up before this recording to get a little bit of your background and so forth. Can you tell us a little bit about your background? You're originally from Uruguay and
Yes.
have experience both in the heat stress climates of Florida and now in the a little bit less heat stress climates, but still exist in the summer of Wisconsin. So give us a little bit of background of how you got to the U.S. with your graduate studies and your current position at Wisconsin.
Of course. Again, thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here sharing with you sort of my story and the research that I do. I am originally from Uruguay, as you said. I was raised more as a city girl than a farm girl, but I was exposed, early in my life at a young age to my grandfather's ranch. So that kind of really have a positive impact or influence in where I am today and what am I doing. And, in my family, everybody thought I was going to be a veterinarian or a doctor, things like that. But I decided to study biology just to get more of a rough training in just the basic science. And as an undergrad, I began to work with sheep. In Uruguay, there's a lot of cattle, but there's a lot of sheep as well. So I ended up doing my thesis in sheep, in wool production. And I really loved research. I was like, I need to keep doing this. So I started my master's there back in Uruguay. And my research focus changed a little bit there. I started focusing more on physiology, endocrinology, molecular biology, and I started working with beef cows on pasture and different genotypes. And then there I started sort of like helping others with dairy cow projects. And I was milking beef cows, and then I was introduced to dairy cows. So I was like, how they make all this milk, So it really got me thinking, and I was like, I need to learn more about these. I want to know how they make it. And so I came to the U.S. in 2010, first for an internship, and then in 2011, I came to U.S. to do my PhD here in UW-Madison. And I did it in lactation physiology with Dr. Laura Hernandez. Actually, I was her first graduate student. Don't know if that's good or bad, but it was a great, great experience. And there in my PhD, I focused mostly on the communication between the mammary gland and the bone for calcium mobilization during lactation. And I ended up working with mice and rats and cows. So I had a really awesome experience. And in 2014, I finished and I moved to Florida. I started my own research program in mammary physiology, lactation biology. So, naturally transitioned to work with heat stress, taking advantage of the 250 days of heat stress there in Gainesville. And, started collaborating heavily with Dr. Jeff Dahl there. And then my focus shift a little bit into heat stress and trying to investigate, the developmental consequences of in utero heat stress and fetal programming and the long-term effects of perinatal programming in a way. And did a lot of research there, was there for 5 years. And 3 years ago in 2020, I was recruited back to UW-Madison, to my alma mater, and I couldn't say no. So here I am back in the Dairyland, continuing some of the work that we started in Florida here, and doing some other exciting work that I would love to share with you.
When it comes to raising healthy animals, you need more than the right solutions. You need the right partner who brings decades of industry expertise and a global team to put that knowledge to work for the advancement of your operation. At Phibro Animal Health Corporation, we are proud to work with you as your trusted partner.
Great. Well, we're looking forward to digging into the discussions about heat stress, especially heat stress in the young calf, and the future effect on that for the effect for the animal, and then talk a little bit about epigenetics also, and you have some USDA grants that are quite interesting also. For those of you listening, look back in the previous podcast. Dr. Jeff Dahl was a previous guest on our dairy podcast show. Some really great discussion about the effect of heat stress on dry cows and the effect on that calf. And Dr. Laporta will continue with some of that data and the research that's been done in that area. I guess as we get started here, as most of you know, if you're a regular listener, I'm connecting here from Torreon, Mexico. So if we're looking for some of the hottest places on the globe, I think this summer we had a few days where Torreon was actually in the news as one of the hottest places on the globe. And you can wonder why we have milk cows here, but we do, as many other heat stress areas. So certainly the weather's a bit cooler as we move into this time of year, which is great for milk production and better reproductive performance. But we know that heat stress is just around the corner, and we need to prepare for it, as in all areas. So as we start with that, Jimena, why don't you tell us a little bit about your USDA grant that's just wrapping up, and then one that's just starting, a little bit of the background of those grants. And I guess, as we always like to do, is take home some points today. Gee, what can I do differently, or what can I think about differently through the winter here? In most cases, some of our listeners may be in the Southern Hemisphere, and they could use this information right now as summer is coming upon them. But what can we do to abate the issues that we see? And again, think outside of the box a bit. In most herds, we have good to excellent cooling in lactating cows. Hopefully, we have it in close-up. Maybe the dry cows kind of get second best or nothing. And calves, for the most part, have kind of been forgotten in a lot of facilities, a lot of places. So when really, as the future of the herd, we know nutrition. Tell us about that link between nutrition, heat stress, and then I guess you can throw in some of those epigenetic type processes there.
Yeah, absolutely. I can start with a little bit of thoughts on that, right? So we are all well aware of the impact that heat stress has on lactating cows all over the world, and I think this is becoming not just a regional issue; it's worldwide, right? And I think our research is becoming more and more relevant as we understand that heat stress also affects cattle of all ages, like you said, growing heifers, young stock, dry cows. And when we start to factor in all the losses that we have from that, really the economic impact is substantial. And we have to start thinking about that. So I think our work that began in Florida and continuing here in Wisconsin has really showed that heat stress experienced during a very relative short period of time during the dry period when the cow is pregnant can really affect not just the cow herself, and this is part of what Dr. Dahl was discussing, the impact on that dry cow in her next lactation. We see a huge detriment in her mammary gland. And just as a little bit of background, I'm a mammary physiologist by training, so I really looked deep into the gland, and we see microstructural differences, cell turnover differences impacted by dry period heat stress, particularly during that early involution stage, that really, really impact her ability to produce milk in the next lactation. But the other important concept here is that dry cow is pregnant, right? It's in her last trimester of pregnancy. And there's a lot going on in utero. That calf is growing at an exponential rate. Her organs are developing. There's a lot of plasticity going on there. So when the cow is pregnant, the intrauterine environment is impacted. So that calf is growing and developing in a hot environment. And that has an impact on her physiology, development, and again, epigenetics, as we were talking about earlier. You were mentioning that. And so in utero, heat stress can really impact the epigenetic signature, like I like referring to as that. It's a signature that in utero heat stress exerts on that animal that stays with her for life. We have seen that these epigenetic changes that are triggered in utero really are observed at different stages of life, not only in the mammary gland, which is where I dig into the most, but also we see the same genes and the same pathways that are impacted in bull calves, in the liver of bull calves, right? Nothing to do, different gender, different stage of life, different organ, and it's the same genes. We have found these common genes and pathways that are methylated, that are changed in utero, that are impacting the physiology of the cow, of the bull, in terms of the heifers and the cows later on. Those differences probably are the ones that are really impacting her ability to produce milk when they become cows. So I went through different routes. So you guide me where you want me to go, and we'll go there.
No, thank you,
but
Jimena.
That's kind of like a boots on the ground for this first USDA grant. The mammary gland differences that we see as well. Those heifers are born smaller, but their mammary glands are much smaller. The weight and the size, and those cells that are inside the gland that are going to be future milk, producing milk in the future, those are truly impacted as well. So that cellular turnover and the size of the fat pad, everything, and not just at birth, but later in life as well.
Okay, so I got a lot of questions going on here. I guess
I talk too much, so you need to stop.
No, not at all. No, this is perfect. So first one, for some of our listeners, epigenetics is certainly a common buzzword now. Lots of people hearing about it. I joke with some of my friends that epigenetics helps me explain some of my friends' behaviors. But in serious terms, for our listeners, can you give the quick,
yes,
the quick definition of epigenetics and some good examples of epigenetics that affect the dairy animal?
Yes. So epigenetics, the definition is simple, is above genetics, right? So all the cells in our body have for the most part, the same DNA information in the cells. But epigenetics can change. So this gives the DNA a possibility to change more rapidly and more dynamically. And these epigenetic mechanisms, that there are a few. The one that you might have heard the most is methylation, but there are also, other epigenetic modifications that will change the chromatin structure. For example, histone modifications, and also another buzzword is the long non-coding RNAs that can really change the way that those genes are packed and affect the expression of certain genes. So I think, long story short, epigenetics gives plasticity to a more fixed genome, to be able to, depending on the environment they are at, depending on the nutrition they have, depending on how hot it is, they can change and adapt physiologically by changing the expression of certain genes and pathways. So just an example that might help understand the concept is, for example, the beta-casein gene that it's only expressed in the mammary gland, right? It's going to be hypomethylated. There's no methylation there, so that gene is expressed all the time in the mammary gland when it's lactating. But in the muscle, for example, that gene is silenced. So it's very heavily methylated, because methylation, for the most part, and I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty, but when a gene is methylated, it's likely silenced. So beta-casein, which is a gene that is exclusively expressed in the mammary gland, will not be expressed in the muscle, but the gene is going to be there. And so vice versa with the, myosin protein, the gene is present in the DNA of the cell in the mammary gland, but is silenced by methylation, if that makes sense. So this methylation will change the ability of those genes to be expressed.
So then if some aversive event caused methylation of those genes in the mammary gland, you would have potentially reduced protein production in milk as a
Exactly.
simple
Yes.
Explanation of that.
So I like to demystify, methylation, because it seems like a scary word, that it's a bad thing, but it really isn't. It really allows the animal to adapt to its environment. It allows the fetus to adapt to its environment. It senses the environment, and it helps, for the most part, it helps with adaptation. And it's a quick way. The other way is, mutation in genes that requires years and years and years to be fixated in a population. That happens, it's mostly common in evolution, but methylation or epigenetics is a quick way that allowed for plasticity. So we have to sort of demystify that. And an example that I like to use as well is, there are a couple of papers actually that very, very elegantly show this. For example, cows that are infected and have mastitis, for example, the first reaction is to reduce milk production, right? Because of that infection. The way that that infection deals with this is by methylating the promoter of milk protein genes. So then those are going to be reduced, and there's going to be less milk production. So you have a bacteria, you need to reduce milk production, and that's a simple way of doing it, and it's reversible, right? Once the bug is gone, then there's a signal to, okay, now you're ready to go back to milking. That's another example.
So, Jimena, along those lines, given that it is reversible, are there situations, for instance, okay, we'll talk about heat stress in the unborn calf in utero or in the early neonatal period? Those would be examples potentially of changes in the gene methylation that are non-reversible, correct?
Yes, and it's more complex than we want to talk about today, but yes, those methylation changes that occur in utero, what we have seen is that they somehow get past those periods where methylation is raised in development, and they are able to stay with the animal for a long period of time. And those, along with morphological changes that happen in the tissues, for example, the mammary gland of those in utero heat stress heifers is not only smaller, but the ductal structure that really during puberty and gestation is going to start invading that fat pad and proliferating. It's smaller, it's reduced, it has reduced proliferation. So what we think is happening is that signal of stress in utero is really triggering methylation and tissue structure changes that together really signal that animal that the environment is not a good one, because they are heat stress in utero. So there are different theories that have been proposed, but for the most part, the animal is preparing for a life outside the womb that they think is going to be that, right? It's going to be harsh, it's going to be hot. And so potentially those changes that are happening are trying to protect and adapt that animal for lower production, for survival. That's what we think might be happening. And we have shown that even when you cool the calves at birth, those calves that were in utero heat stress, those changes still remain. At least in terms of growth, we don't recover that, at least during the pre-weaning period. And those animals are going to be kind of impacted for a long time.
So that really makes a lot of sense. We don't want to propagate that, obviously. We want high-producing, productive animals, but really if that animal is born, is going to be born, or is born into an environment that's harsh, then lower milk production would obviously make sense for survival. Obviously that animal programming doesn't know that it potentially is going to be, as an adult, in a wonderful facility with cow cooling and comfort. But if you think about that, it makes a lot of sense of the adaptation of during early neonatal life. So as we take that information and some of that background, tell us about the trial that you just wrapped up and what it's looking at, and some of the results you hope to find from that work.
Yeah, so I think some of that we talked about a little bit. We were able to map the sort of the epigenetic signature across time in the mammary gland, and we see these changes that are really sort of permanent and that are shared between other tissues and other genders. Like the bull calves also have these methylation changes from specific genes that are impacted by in utero heat stress. So we were able to do that, and we did a series of euthanasias in these animals. We did birth and weaning, and then at puberty, we also collected mammary biopsies. We collected also during gestation, which those two are really important developmental stages for the mammary gland. And we see that, one thing that is very important in the mammary gland is proliferation of those cells, differentiation, proliferation, to grow into that mammary fat pad as they grow, right? And so what we see across the board is at birth, at weaning, at puberty, during gestation, and later during lactation, is that the capacity of the mammary gland to proliferate is impacted tremendously. I want to say that reduced by 20 to 30% in those heifers that were in utero heat stress. So there's something going on. I definitely think methylation plays a role, but we haven't tied that to proliferation yet. That it's really signaling that animal to let's not proliferate, just stay quiet to the mammary gland, right? So they not only have smaller glands, we show that across time, but those glands also proliferate quite less than a heifer that was in utero cool at the same time. And so that was really striking to see that epigenetic signature across the board, that the proliferation is really impacted. We were able to do some economic analysis of the losses in production of those heifers. Productive life is really impacted. Just overall lifespan is impacted greatly as well. So when you put that into the equation, right, it really adds on to the losses of the dry cow herself when you think about her progeny. And so we estimated roughly $600 million on top of what has been estimated for the dry cow herself, which is roughly $800 million in losses due to milk production reductions. So really that adding that progeny into the equation really, further exacerbates the problem. So we know it's a problem already. And I guess sort of one other thing that we found is that the granddaughters of those dry cows, so these are the daughters of the daughters, right? If that makes sense. So these are what we call the second generation. So you have when you think about a dry cow that it's under heat stress, you have the impact on the cow herself, which is generation 0 to me. You have an impact on the F1, which is her daughter. So that's generation 1. But you also have an impact on the F2, okay, which is the second generation. And this is because in the fetal daughter, during that heat stress, the germline that's going to give rise to the granddaughters is also developing in utero at that time. So we haven't confirmed this, but what we think is going on is those methylation changes and tags are also bound to the germline. And so you're impacting the granddaughter as well because of that. And we've seen these animals produce less milk, they survive less. And now I'm getting my hands dirty because we're looking at the phenotypic impact on those heifers. So this is really kind of new data that we're getting right now, but it's we're seeing that those granddaughters' mammary glands proliferate less, which is striking.
I find that information really, really interesting and share that with our producers and clients. But I think it's really important for our dairy producers to recognize that, because as we work for improving not only genetics, but management and cow comfort and so forth, what are some effects that are going to take now multiple generations to recover from, if you will, or move beyond? And I think that's really important. Before we connected, Jimena, you talked a little bit about looking at heat stress and different levels of nutrition, feeding strategies. Can you comment on that? And I think maybe you're leading to that a little bit, the phenotypic expression. Is there some ability? Okay, we've had this insult. We've methylated these genes. They're turned off, but is there some ability to recuperate or recover with higher planes of nutrition, and then a little bit of that interaction? We know from really early trials. When I was an undergrad at Cornell, Mike Van Emberg was doing his pivotal feeding trials that have been repeated now with many different groups. But so we know the impact of early life nutrition on milk production. But now, how do these go hand in hand when you put another stress, such as heat stress, onto that?
Right. So I think that's a very interesting area, because in terms of the prenatal heat stress, so the in utero heat stress, what we have done in our lab is, once they are born, what you do is we gave them, we cooled them. Okay, so we were thinking, all right, if you're born to a heat stress dry cow, but as soon as you're born, I cool you, you're going to recover, right? But we didn't see that. The growth, they were very responsive to the cooling. So we provided fans, so roughly 2 meters per second of airspeed throughout the pre-weaning period. And the growth of that animal, we weren't able to recuperate. So they stay smaller. They, feed intake, we were able to improve a little bit. They were responsive to the cooling. So when you measure rectal temperatures, they were, back to normal. But the growth was not rescued. So we tried with cooling a little bit. Nutrition, I'm not aware, and I think this is a fertile area of trying to rescue the in utero heat stress heifer with nutrition. What what we're working on right now, and this is in the newer USDA grant. I am bragging about this because for a few months I have two overlapping, so I brag about that. But we're starting this new USDA grant in collaboration with Shatao from University of Georgia and also Adam Geiger from Simpro, because in his doctoral work, he showed that feeding higher planes of nutrition early on in life can greatly impact mammary growth, specifically parenchyma growth, which is what it's going to become, that future secretory tissue. And so we knew that heat stress during that early life can also impact mammary growth. So cooling can improve mammary growth. So what we're trying here is the interaction between these two. We're providing heat abatement in summer with high and low plane of nutrition. So what we're trying to do here is to revamp the old dogma that, the mammary gland, it's becoming important when she hits puberty, and that's where we need to intervene. We're seeing, and there's a lot of research, and actually Van Amber's research is very important in that area, has contributed significantly to show that the mammary gland allometric growth really starts early on in life during that pre-weaning phase. So this is a tremendous opportunity to manipulate that, and it's 60 days that we can do something and help that cow to for a better start, right? To improve mammary growth early on, and we have seen great impact by nutrition, by cooling, and things like that. So what we're trying to do here is combine these two, test the interactions in two different environments. We're going to test this in the Midwest, in Wisconsin, and also in Georgia. Clearly different climates, different summers. And kind of the question is, do we need cooling here? Or maybe if we improve nutrition, we can impact mammary growth in summer. My suspicion is that in Georgia, you will still need the cooling, but we really want to demonstrate that with data. So we're going to follow these animals and hopefully get some first lactation data on them. So that's the long story short.
Okay. Jimena, can you speculate at all from a very practical standpoint, what we've seen over the last few years, and I speak to your colleagues even in more heat stressed areas of the U.S., these calves that in Mexico, agitadas, agitated calves, or in many cases misdiagnosed as pneumonia, but they're often very young calves, within the first week of life, that show these signs of high respiratory rate. Again, you might think it's a pneumonia case, but you tend to take a step back as a veterinarian and say, well, gee, it's really rare to have a pneumonia case that early in life. Possible, but not likely. And what we really related to these two is heat stress. It seems to be, especially at the end of the season, when maybe even heat stress is improving a little bit, but this accumulation, maybe some of these dry cows that really had, their dry period, the entire dry period through heat stress. I guess I don't want to call it a new disease, but it seems to be more recognized. And my question to you is, in trying to explain that, what's happened in most herds is a much improved plane of nutrition, more milk feeding, and maybe this doesn't explain it, but almost are we certainly don't want to look at feeding more milk as detrimental in that case, but are those calves at a metabolic rate or level that's causing, I'll say cause and effect, but because of the higher metabolic rate related to greater nutrient intake, are these signs more evident? Because it seems to be a newer syndrome. 6 years ago, we didn't see as such, but now as we've seen actually improved management and feeding strategy, more cases of these agitadas or agitated calves.
Right. I think your line of thought is pretty spot on. I would have to agree with that. I think it comes to the theory that they are coming from a heat stress environment in utero with likely lower nutrients, less oxygen. They are born hypoxic. They're undergoing hypoxia and lower nutrient availability in utero from the mother, and they are coming to an environment that it's richer in nutrients. So I think that's a possibility. There are some theories that really explain this in terms of there's the silver spoon hypothesis, the predictive adaptive hypothesis, that if you're in a more detrimental environment and you come to a better environment, you're having a hard time adapting to that. And I think that could be it. The other thing to add on top of that is that from what we have seen, if a calf is born, a heifer is born to a heat-stressed dry cow, they have elevated rectal temperature. We haven't seen that with respiration rate. I think they do have a little higher respiration rate, but rectal temperature, basal rectal temperature, core body temperature is, if I remember correctly, 0.2 degrees Celsius-ish higher than a heifer that was not born to a heat-stressed cow. So their bodies are shifting their core body temperature to a hotter environment. So it's possible that they are breathing heavier because their bodies are adapting as well. And the other thing that could be happening as well that we have seen quite a bit is they have lower hematocrit, lower red blood cells when they are born. So that ability to exchange oxygen might be impacted as well. Yeah. So I think the hypoxia coming from in utero, and then that they are born with lower red blood cells, lower platelets, and with that core body temperature that it's higher than a heifer that wasn't heat stress in utero, that all adds into the syndrome, I think. And if on top of that you're trying to feed her more, she might not even want to eat, right? So that's something that we saw as well. Those that were born to in utero heat stress dry cows, their appetite was depressed. So if you want to shovel more nutrients there, you might have to find a different strategy to do that. So yeah, there's a lot of factors, but I think when you put them all together, it makes sense that these animals are having a rough transition.
And I would say we do see that from observational data that, calves not consuming all of their milk. A healthy calf that is no signs of scours, pneumonia, what have you, just not finishing their milk. So I think that's
yeah. No, and anecdotally, we tried to do some behavioral tests with milk as a reward, and we totally failed because that was not the reward that we should be offering because they were just not wanting to eat. So I think it has to do with appetite suppression while they are in utero. Something's going on there that programs them to not wanting to eat.
So it seems like the really simple take home from this is cool your dry cows. And obviously that's easy to say, but you wouldn't have any research to do if everyone did that really effectively. But a comment that you made earlier on, which I took a note here, is the early dry period effect on the mammary gland and heat. And so can you go back to that? Because a lot of times our earliest dry cows are maybe the ones, I don't want to say neglected, right? But the old school,
Yeah, you're done. I don't want to think of you anymore.
Yeah, out in the back 40 type thing. And then maybe, close up, you come to a better facility with obviously close up diet and so forth. But what you said there actually indicates that potentially those immediate days after dry off are actually the most important in terms of the regeneration of the gland.
And they are. I from a mammary physiology standpoint, and this is something that we often not think about when we're thinking about the practical implications of why we offer a dry period to a cow, right? So really that dry off date, that milk stasis that you start when you dry off a cow is really important. Those 4 days, first 4, 5, 6 days are really, really crucial for the turnover of cells in the gland. So you want cells to be dying, actually. So that milk stasis, shutting down milk protein genes and inducing cell death, it's very important at that time. First week of the dry period is crucial to get rid of all those cells that have been producing milk for 10 months. They are just tired. So that environment there is really helping with that, accelerating that clean off senescent cells that are just tired of producing milk, so that during the redevelopment phase, when that cow is going to approach parturition and you have all the hormones, colostrogenesis, and all of that, you want to have proliferation in that phase. But in order for proliferation to happen effectively, you need to get rid of those old cells. And that happens in the first week of the dry period. So from a mammary gland biologist perspective, that first week is the most important that you probably, like you said, is sometimes the most neglected.
Okay, so heat stress negatively affects programmed cell death is kind of the take home there.
Yes, you got it.
Excellent.
Yes.
So yeah, lots of good data to, I guess, support what we already know, but hopefully some of this background will help our listeners really focus on, okay, don't forget that dry transition cow, because it has a huge impact not only on that animal but future offspring. And again, I think that's exciting because there's actually an opportunity there. It's not like, okay, this happens, we can't do anything about it, but probably on most sites, we could actually do a lot about it.
Yeah, and I think on that note, the dry period is an opportunity. It's a short period that we can do something. The pre-weaning phase is an opportunity. It's a short period of time that you can really impact. And I think that this, I like calling it perinatal program. And if you think about the calf, right, the in utero, and then, that early life, those early weeks and months are really instrumental for them to perform later on. And I think, perinatal programming is becoming a thing because we're starting to recognize that what we do there can really have an impact for life. And so I think that producers are starting to listen and I'm starting to see these long-term carryover effects and more data in this area, that it's really eye-opening. Those detrimental effects in the daughters and the granddaughters really, set the stage for this research to be meaningful. Because when you start to see those detriments down the road and you start putting numbers on this, and also, as a welfare concern, nobody wants to have cows that are not being producing at their best potential, right? And so that's costly. That's a lot of money. We have data showing that the daughters, so those first generation heifers, some of them don't even make it to lactation, and it's like 25%. So that's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah, and I guess these are. I'm really excited for our clients to listen to these comments, because again, we have herds that are focusing on genomics and other methods that have a investment, have a cost, and not to say don't do those, but almost where genomics, where's the place for genomics when we're not properly cooling our dry cows, perhaps? Maybe those are things that we can do. Start with the basics again, and then move on to those maybe some more.
Yeah, and I think the word is out there. Like Dr. Dahl has been talking about these for 10 years now, and I think that they are starting to listen. So I think that change is happening, and I think that the research that we're doing is it's important to get out there and showing with numbers, with data, that this is really a thing. So we have to stop thinking about heat stress as a summer, seasonal summer. Heat stress is impacting your herd even in winter, because of this, what I like calling the hidden effects of heat stress.
That's a great point. And I think also, a lot of folks who maybe live in southern climates would say, oh, Wisconsin doesn't have heat stress, or northern New York, or what have you. And for those who have any time there or dairies, certainly it's less.
But you know what? There's a lot of cows.
Yes,
and so even these shorter summers or periods of heat stress can really have an impactful effect in your cows. If you think about 15% of dry cows during that time, there's a lot of cows.
Excellent. So excellent, Jimena. I think we have a lot of information for our listeners to really think about. Again, for those in the Northern Hemisphere, to prepare, plenty of time to prepare. For those listeners who are in your home country and south of the equator, you better get on it to help prevent the effects of summer that are coming.
It's time for our famous 3. Maximize profitability and herd health with early detection in animal health, reproduction, calving, and feeding. The most advanced bolus technology and professional support from agricultural experts makes this possible. SMAX Tech, the health system that future-proofs your operation.
As we wrap up, Jimena, kind of have the traditional dairy podcast show questions, I guess. What one would be a resource that you go to, and this can be, text, online, what have you, in terms of dairy production, dairy management. What would you recommend, to our audience?
I think with PubMed and these open access journals that we have, there's a lot of information. I think there's probably too much information. I wish I had more time to read, but I think it's a great resource, open access journals that you can access from anywhere, anytime, with information on the latest research. And also, there's a lot of universities, including ours, obviously, doing a lot of great extension work. So I think those really summarize and bring it down to earth, right? The things that we find, and sort of digest them to communicate them in an easier way. So I think those are my go-tos in terms of dairy. Books, I'm teaching lactation physiology for graduate students and undergrads here in Wisconsin. So I typically read books for that. And I wanted to show you the one I'm reading now, which is called Milk. And it's Milk, the evolution, the biology of lactation. And I think that really inspires me in a way. I read it every time I have to teach, because it talks about the evolution of milk as a food. It talks about the evolution of milk protein genes. It talks about the evolution of the mammary gland. And so I really recommend it. It's a really great book to give you some perspective on milk and mammary gland, how fascinating it is.
Excellent. And when you're maybe not as connected with work, is there anything recently that you've read or watched, documentary, what have you, that's of interest? And I think it's always cool to understand sometimes how we relate those to the dairy business or the dairy industry or what we do day to day. Anything stand out?
Quite frankly, I don't read a lot outside of the walls of academia, which is embarrassing. But I will tell you that I have a 5 and a 7-year-old, and they are in kindergarten and second grade, so they are learning how to read. So, I'm reading things like Click, Clack, Moo and Pete the Cat and, the Dogman. So if you have kids of that age, you will probably agree with me. So, yeah, just reading with my kids, we do that every night. So And then I don't have time to do anything else.
That's probably more exciting. And I just a comment here, a whole nother podcast likely, but I was chatting with some folks at a meeting the other day, and the concern about some of the readings that are given to young children in school that are anti-animal agriculture or anti-production agriculture. So having said that, I think for those of you who have young children out there, grandchildren, at an early age, choose those type readings that can start to educate them what production agriculture is. And then I guess, and then along the lines of, I guess we've already said here, what separates some of the most progressive, profitable, successul producers. You might say cool your dry cows, but what are some comments you have there in terms of you're working, with producers at the university and even extension levels?
Yeah, I think that, I've seen you asking this question before, and you got me thinking. I believe that for dairy producers, they are bombarded with all this information, right? Like us from the university side, generating cutting edge science and knowledge and challenging dogmas and, all of that can be actually overwhelming. What is that I need to know and what is that I need to implement? What will work? What will not? So I think that what separates successful or more successful is, kind of be able to have an open mind and be able to filtrate that information. This is where I think extension programs are doing an amazing job. And, not only those, when horse dairyman, progressive dairyman, and things like that, summarize information in a way that is digestible, that it's understandable, that they can use. I think those are the ones that will keep an open mind and think critically. Those are going to be the ones that are going to be successful. And I think in terms of heat stress and the research that we do, being acknowledging that heat stress is not going to go away, unfortunately. And I'm always, optimistic in life in general, but with the predictions that we have, it's something that will stay with us, and we have to adapt to that, and we have to be proactive and look at different things. And yes, cooling your dry cows, cooling your calves, that's easy to say. There are other things that we can do, through nutrition, genetics. There are many things. There's no one recipe that will fix it all. So I think it's combining different strategies that will yield the best results. So keep an open mind and listen to all you can.
Excellent. I think those are some really great comments. Thinking outside of the box, being an early, maybe you don't have to be the first adopter of something, but an early adopter in most cases.
Yep.
So, Dr. Laporta, thank you so much for joining us today. I think a really interesting conversation. Lots of take-home points. I think practical application. Be really interesting to see the results from your current grant that's wrapping up, and then obviously in the future the grant that you're starting up, the grant work. Again, I think a plug for Wisconsin, the university. Lots of good resources on your websites and so forth. You have a really strong group there, and it's great to see the research and the practicality of the research that's coming out of the group at Wisconsin, as many other universities. So with that, from the Dairy Podcast Show, Dr. Laporta, thank you.
Thank you so much for letting me, share my story, my research, and what I'm very passionate about. This is a very fertile area of research, and I'm really proud to be part of it.
Excellent. And as we wrap up on a Friday afternoon here, enjoy the weekend, and hopefully you won't be experiencing too much heat stress here in mid-October in Wisconsin.
No, definitely not. Thank you so much.
Take care, and thanks to all our listeners. And we look forward to having you connect again on a recent podcast as they keep coming out. So look for those hot topics. Thank you.